This is CNN Breaking News.
We are following the breaking news in Charlottesville, Virginia. One person is dead, 34 total injured in the violent white nationalist clashes in Charlottesville, Virginia. The person killed died when a car plowed into a crowd. We have the video, but we're about to show you. It is very graphic. If there are children in the room, you may want them to leave. And there you see that terrifying scene there, a trail of bloodied and horrified people. President Trump just spoke out condemning the hatred and bigotry on display in Charlottesville. Here's what he said just a short time ago.
What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives. No citizen should ever fear for their safety and security in our society, and no child should ever be afraid to go outside and play or be with their parents and have a good time. I just got off the phone with the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, and we agreed that the hate and the division must stop, and must stop right now. We have to come together as Americans with love for our nation and true affection, really, and I say this so strongly, true affection for each other. Our country is doing very well in so many ways. We have record, just absolute record employment. We have unemployment, the lowest it's been in almost 17 years.
That was the president moments ago. Meantime, we are now hearing from people on the scenes in Charlottesville. Let's listen to this witness.
Immediate reaction, of course, from the crowd, and then the car reversed very fast back up the street, as you can see in the video. So we were still, sort of in the scene and jumped out to get around the corner of this barrier of this building, and the car flew by, and immediately, there was victims started coming out. My friend ran after the car. I gave first aid to a lady that had come out from the scene, and yeah, that's basically what happened. The car disappeared after that.
Were you able to get a look at the driver as he sped by you?
No, the car had tinted windows, so it was difficult to see in. So I was more looking, is this person going to come directly towards me? So I was looking to get out of the way of the car, right, as it came back. When it came past us, we didn't see it. I just saw it plow, like Brennan said, into the group of protesters, and I thought, well, this is clearly like a terrorist incident, right?
I got a glimpse of the driver. I was standing about, just a few feet from him as he came back. It was a white male. He appeared to have close-cropped hair, but it was, tinted windows, so I didn't get a very good look at him.
And Chris, could you share what you saw in the moments just before Brennan's video started rolling?
So we were walking down the road, as Brennan mentioned, but we came around the corner, and you could see the car just over the other side of the road, just sat there, looking down the road. And as he said, the protesters were coming down 4th Street. So I thought that's a bit strange. There didn't seem to be any other cars stopping him from going. And then, of course, moments later, we heard a car going incredibly fast, down the road, and saw it plow into the crowd, and then it reversed back, and then we were some of us ran after the car to take a photo, and then followed it, ran down the road, alerting the police to chase it.
What transpired in those minutes after the car left this block and left view? What was the scene like here?
Well, there was almost an immediate response from first responders. There were state police right here on the mall. I don't know if they actually witnessed it, so we alerted them and said, you need to get down there immediately. There was first aid crews came in, and then pretty quickly an armored vehicle came down to block the scene. So, the response was quick. But, obviously, I understand one person lost their life, and, it was a very, very violent attack.
And Brennan, you said that you helped administer first aid to a woman. What else did you observe in terms of victims of that crash?
There were a lot of victims around the scene of the actual crash, just halfway down the block, and then people coming up, bloodied, shaken, obviously, people having, hyperventilating. And then, yeah, again, let the professionals take over. And then we got out of this, got out of the scene. It was obviously an increasingly violent day in Charlottesville, and certainly agree with the mayor's recommendation that people just stay home.
Now, Brennan, you traveled here from Washington. I'm sorry, Chris, you traveled here from Washington, D.C. To be a part of the counter-protest to the Unite the Right rally. How do you describe the emotions you felt as you saw this attack on other counter-protesters like yourself?
I can't honestly say there were emotions of surprise, because up around the center of the protest from both sides, you had a high level of antagonism, right? It wasn't necessarily peaceful. You had people literally in military fatigues with arms walking around, so of course that's an incredibly intimidating environment. So then naturally when that happened, I thought, this is someone deliberately attacking these people, because of their beliefs. And yeah, and like Brennan said, yeah, it's a little bit traumatizing, of course, to witness these people go flying, and later, the carnage for everybody lying around. Because I walked with the police officer back, from around the corner after we'd said, look, one of these cars has to follow, and they were fantastic. The first officer I came into contact with, I said, that car just plowed into a whole load of people, as I was sprinting down the road as it was trying to get away and maneuver through all these other vehicles. And he immediately got on the mic, and got in contact with another police car that had kind of pulled out behind it. I think because it was suspicious, right? Because the front of the car was all smashed up, and they had the helicopter overhead. And he said, "Yeah, we're on it. Quickly, take me to where this has happened." And of course, by the time I got back, like Brennan said, the response was in full swing. Yeah.
Chris, I was watching the protest in Emancipation Park earlier today from a safe distance. How do you describe what that experience was like?
I mean, look, it's shocking to see this kind of disgusting hatred on the streets of a town as beautiful as Charlottesville. And there was an attempt to separate the crowds, but it got violent very quickly. And so, yeah, I certainly agree with the decision to declare a state of emergency and try and shut it down. It's a terrible thing that we're witnessing.
Where do you both anticipate today going from here, when protesters and counter-protesters have been separated, but when, as you've both just witnessed, such a horrific act of violence as that car plowed through the streets?
With the sentiments certainly expressed by those that you probably heard when you were observing those people that consider themselves this alternative right movement, were certainly not inclusive. They were divisive, and it's quite scary, right, to live in such an environment. And of course, this is why we came to participate in a protest, whose core message is a rejection of that, and support for inclusion, social cohesion in society, where everyone, no matter what their race, religious belief, ethnic background, should have an equal opportunity and an equal role in society. And the level of discourse that one sees perhaps needs some significant steps forward to be taken.
What did you learn today as you saw these two factions at war with one another?
I mean, look, we saw an incident of domestic terrorism. I would not describe it as a war by any means. You had a group of nonviolent, peaceful protesters demonstrating their constitutional right to march against racism, and they were plowed down by a terrorist, from the alt-right or Nazis or whatever you want to call them. That's what I witnessed, and so I don't think there's a war between different sides.
For people who couldn't be here in Charlottesville today,
Haley Hartung. Our reporter Kaylee Hartung on the scene there, interviewing a couple of eyewitnesses to the car crash that led to a fatality and at least 19 people being injured on the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia. That was one incident that happened after some rallies in which we saw the video of the fistfights and the batons and people clashing with each other. We learned there were 15 more injuries involved in this earlier today. And meantime, the social media has been all over this story, reaction coming in strong and swift. I want to bring back our senior media correspondent and host of Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter. Among those who've been reacting, we just had a tweet from Jeb Bush on Twitter saying this: the white supremacists and their bigotry do not represent our great country. All Americans should condemn this vile hatred. Hashtag Charlottesville. The president has received criticism for the remarks he made without calling out white supremacists specifically. And I want to put up a tweet by Glenn Thrush. He is a reporter with the New York Times, and he put it this way. He says it is neither unfair nor inaccurate to point out that the president has been tougher on Mitch McConnell than Putin or Nazis in the last 24 hours.
And we've been through this cycle before, a cycle where the president, whether on the campaign trail or now as president, doesn't initially express the kind of condemnation that analysts, critics on both sides of the partisan divide are expecting. Today, it's about the president not using the words white nationalists or white supremacists, not acknowledging the explicit racism that was seen last night on the campus of UVA and today in the streets of Charlottesville. And this is ongoing. Let's be clear. We're seeing pictures from earlier, but there are helicopters overhead in Charlottesville. There are protesters still milling about downtown, and there's concerns about what's going to happen tonight, which is why there's a state of emergency.
Kaylee Hartung said that the organizer of the rally on the white supremacist side said specifically this is not over.
And as a result, what the president says matters even more because it's an ongoing situation. To be fair, there's a lot we do not know, especially about the man that rammed a car into that group of counter-protesters.
Right.
There's a history of these clashes this year. You've covered some of them. There was a neo-Nazi confrontation in Kentucky. There were brawls in Berkeley, California. Some of the violence in Berkeley was stoked by leftists who were trying to stop right-wing speakers.
And Brian, there was an incident in this same
town
earlier
that's right.
this year,
And some
back
of these
in
guys,
May.
they want to fight, and you can see it in these pictures. They want to brawl. But the point is that this began as a Unite the Right rally. It began as a far right-wing event. That is the prominent cause for the violence today, for the injuries and the fatality today. And so for the president to say many sides, talking about many sides, I think that's going to continue to be a focal point. There's going to be more questions asked about what he meant. And he has scheduled a press conference for Monday. Remember, the president promised a press conference on Monday. So as a result of what's happening in Charlottesville, there's going to be continued pressure on the president to say more. I would just remind our viewers about what happened last November. The president was the president-elect at the time. Trump was at Trump Tower getting ready to take over. And in November, there was a man inspired by ISIS on the campus of Ohio State who drove his car, plowing down people and then using a knife to attack. The president-elect at the time spoke out pretty quickly, issued comments on Twitter. He then went to the scene of the crime. He went to visit the victims and spoke about the importance of immigration and national security. So we've seen the president in the past speak out about incidents of vehicular attacks, and that's what that was in the campus of Ohio State. It's interesting to see what more he may or may not say in this case. We know 19 injured as a result of this vehicular attack, 1 dead. There will be a debate about whether it's terrorism, but it clearly terrorized the people there.
On scene calling it a terrorist attack.
It obviously terrorized them. The video certainly is terrorizing. It's going to be seen all over the place on social media and on television. I think the president said one really important thing toward the end today. He said, we want to study this. We want to see what we're doing wrong as a country when things like this can happen. I think those are words everybody can agree with, that we should study what this is about, why these racists and anti-Semites feel they need to come out and protest, why they feel their country's being taken away from them. Those kinds of sickening views need to be confronted head on. And that's what we saw a lot of counter-protesters doing today. These hundreds of people that were trying to speak out against the white nationalists at Charlottesville.
Images and the deep divide happening in our country right now. Brian Stelter, stand by. We got to squeeze in a quick break. We'll be right back.